Ashley, you know this about me. I love going to restaurants.
Yep.
I really do. I like going to restaurants, but it's not just actually getting to the restaurant. I enjoy thinking about the restaurant before I get there. So like the car drive there, I'm thinking about like what is it that I want. If you're going to like a Mexican restaurant, you say, I want like those hot chips and a cold salsa and a sweet tea or whatever else it is. And you think about what it is because I'm conditioned to like anticipate what's going to happen, and like when that happens it's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about conditioning, it really has made me think about how, all of our states are starting to reopen and we are going back into restaurants, some of us. And even the thought of going into a restaurant for so many people just elicits a lot of anxiety, which goes back to the term conditioning. And so if you haven't taken Psych 101, which is one of the courses I teach, then I'll give you a quick overview.
I took it a long time ago.
Of classical conditioning. So there's classical and operant conditioning. And so there's two different ways that we get conditioned. But with classical conditioning, it deals with our reflexes. And so it's stuff that we really don't control. And so if you just imagine like a lightning bolt and then hearing the thunder, we kind of become conditioned to feel fearful because you're anticipating that loud noise that might be scary. And so when we go to restaurants, we've had all this positive conditioning where, we think, oh, it's going to be really good. It's going to taste yummy. Like you said, it's going to be like these hot chips. And, and so whenever we go, we really enjoy ourselves. But now there's a lot of negative experiences that we're associating with it. And so we have this conditioning where when we go into a restaurant, then we don't know how to behave. Like we've seen people kind of looking around like, oh, like, wait, we don't want to.
Am I allowed to get close to somebody? Am I not allowed close to somebody? Which for me, it can be like, you're ruining my favorite thing in life.
Yeah, and so it also makes it where it doesn't even feel as worth it for a lot of us. And
yeah, because if it's not what you want it to be, then you could say, I don't want to do it at all.
Yeah, and there are a lot of very serious things to consider too, right? Like if we're in high-risk group and if we're sick and all those things. So
sure.
I'm talking apart really from all of that, even though that is kind of the big reason why we are conditioned.
But we're talking about like you've been conditioned for something for your entire life, and then something that you've never experienced before, ever.
Yeah.
You're experiencing that now. It's like, how do I re-enter and how do I manage these emotions as I'm going back to something that I used to be really like solidly conditioned for?
Yeah. So with classical conditioning, a guy named Pavlov was doing some research, and he didn't even mean to stumble upon it, but he realized that whenever he would give dogs food, their dog food, that they would salivate in preparation. So he realized that he could ding different sounds, and he could teach them, to salivate earlier, basically, or like condition them. And so what they learned is that, like, wow, there's a lot of things that we can do to condition our behavior.
Yeah.
And then what he found is that then we can recondition, and some of these behaviors can become extinct, and then they can kind of have this spontaneous recovery and all these things. And this is the really fast version, but all of this is happening to us, as we're going into restaurants. We're reconditioning. And so we're like, okay, we've been afraid, but we think it might be okay. Mm-hmm. And so then we go and we might have, some of the fear, but we can recondition ourselves to say, I think that it's safe and I'm going to just choose to enjoy this experience.
You kind of have to get over that hump.
Yeah.
You kind of have to say, okay, it's not the way that it used to be, but I can recondition myself and I can get over that anxiety, those feelings, and figure out how to adapt, because we're really adaptable.
Yeah.
People are really adaptable and resilient. So you can make the shift and you can make the adaptation, to figure out how to do it now.
Yeah. And so we can get back to enjoying, the regular pleasures that we did. It's not a bad thing. There are a lot of things I know that I've thought of, like, man, I really am vain and selfish that, I'm like, I want to go to a restaurant.
Man, I've thought that about you all the time. Gosh, it's horrible. I'm kidding.
But it's okay that we miss some of these things because these have become part of our lives. But it's also okay to wait and to not go into the restaurants yet or whatever. But whenever we do go into a restaurant, or when we're going into a store or anywhere where we go that we maybe haven't been going for the last month or a few months, just remember that we can be reconditioned. Like, we can choose. And this is where what's really awesome with God is, like, God tells us we can take our thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ. So, like, whenever we start to feel fearful, we say, God, I'm going to do everything I can to be careful, to abide by what is expected of me. Yeah, I'm going to use wisdom, but then I'm going to also be okay to enjoy this hug with my family member. I don't have to be anxious and say we're never going to hug again. And so we can remember that we can be reconditioned. And then a lot of times, like, these behaviors have been extinct. So a lot of people, I've heard people say, like, I'm never hugging again, or,
never shaking
fist
hands,
bumps,
never doing these
all
things.
this stuff. And
of
that's
course,
okay.
if you feel convicted for that,
yeah, that
whatever.
can be, okay for some people. But we also can say, I'm going to be okay with these behaviors. I'm going to hug my family, or I'm going to hug, a really close friend. And we might feel a little bit awkward the first time, but we will learn to love those experiences again if we allow ourselves to go there. And then those behaviors will become extinct. And so in the studies, eventually, like, they would ding the little bell and not give the dog food, and ding the little bell and the dog didn't get food, and the dog would stop salivating. And so what we're finding with us is that we can stop having some of those fear responses. And so in time, we'll get there, but it is perfectly normal for us to have a lot of anxiety or a lot of apprehension as we go into these experiences, but we just don't want to stay there. We want to learn from our emotions, allow them to be experienced, but then don't accept them as what we have to have. Yeah.
There you go.
All right.
That
A
sounds
little
good.
bit of classical conditioning, and we'd love to chat more if you have questions or thoughts. Yeah. Have a good one.
See you.
Enjoy.